First question's really, really simple, Eddie. First of all, thank you so much for joining us at One Cap Wonders. Um, if it wasn't soccer, what else would it been? Could it have been for you, career-wise?
That's a great question. I grew up like, I mean, the story that you've probably heard a million times with professional athletes. I grew up in a blue collar household. Both of my parents had two jobs to get me and my brother fed and get us what we needed for school and get us to and from soccer. And um, that was just, it probably would have been some kind of maybe welding, maybe HVAC repair, because the one thing that I did learn was that, you take advantage of the situation that you're given. And there's in Texas, obviously, HVAC repair is gold mine, like we were talking about in one of your stories. But I honestly don't know. I love the game so much. I might have gone into it in a teaching capacity as I have a few times in my career, but that's a question I really don't have a good answer to. That's one of the best questions I've ever asked, but yet so simple.
Because one injury, one signing. A lot of the players that I've spoken to in this series, Chris Sutton was offered a job in the local council as an office as a clerk,
Oh wow.
and he did the job interview to work in his local municipality.
Wow.
And he just got lucky that someone else got injured, and he got an opportunity to become an academy player for Norwich. And then he won the Golden Boot in the English Premier League with Norwich. And I talked to another gentleman for the season two who's in Cyprus, and he said that he was working in cafes and selling clothes because he was released at 18 years of age and had to drop four divisions down and was playing semi-pro in Cyprus. So if he didn't get noticed by the national team coach, he would have had to stay working in cafes and working in clothes shops. Um,
Wow.
so you just never know where you could end up. Like it is a weird one.
Yeah, and if anybody ever asked you, you've got all of these examples of, hey, most of these guys do it for the love of the game. It's not only a few of them are going to retire. Most of them do it for the love and then have to do something else. Networking was very important for me while I was playing, getting to know the people and the individuals that I did to kind of test the water in a bunch of different ways once I did retire from playing.
I think the US system is very interesting, Eddie, because it helps you get an education. Well, we don't have that here. Like you're 12, 13, 14 years of age, you go across to an academy, you leave your own country, wherever it is, you go to England, you follow the stream, and then like in college sports, a very small number make it. But
Mhm.
but in the US, at least you get some kind of qualification, or at least you get to be a college student before you become a pro in many cases. Do you think that's a good approach?
I think it can be. I think you have to identify the potential of the player early enough, and then if the education they were doing something when I was playing. It started back in the late '90s, early 2000s, to where Nike would put aside a specific amount of money for players that came straight out of high school or left college early. So if they didn't make it, they would have the money to fall back on to go to school. I think some kind of uh, mixture of that and then what they do now would probably be the best. Because if you think that a player has the potential to not only come from your homegrown system the way it is here now, because they don't count towards the salary cap, you can sell them and the proceeds go into the back into the club. You don't have to share it like you do with international stars with the league. Um, you have to identify that a little bit earlier on so that even if it's a player that's not going to make a difference in your team every Saturday, it's a player that you can still get something out of, and they will still have, as you said, if there's a freak injury or they just have a change of heart, they've got something to fall back on, and that is very important.
You were lucky. You never had to worry about that. Your trajectory was for our listeners and our viewers was absolutely outstanding. Like you just went from strength to strength. You won everything twice. So like how did it all start for you?
Well, I mean, it was all good fortune comes from 99% hard work and 1% dumb luck. And
True.
honestly, and I was I went to the University of North Carolina, which at the time and still is a fairly prestigious soccer school. Um, Started all 4 years as started as a defensive midfielder holding a number 6, and then moved to the center back position. Back then, they did this thing called the combine, which they do with the NFL and they do with other sports here in the United States, where a certain number of players will get invited that coaches, professional coaches, want to see a little bit more of. And through that, I was drafted to San Jose with Frank Yallop and Dominic Kinnear. Frank Yallop had his time in the Premier League, scored a cracker against Manchester United. If you've never seen it, go back and look it up. He'll maybe give me a little credit for that. Dominic Kinnear was a staple in the U.S. national team when no one really knew what the American U.S. national soccer team was. Um, so those guys took me under their wing. There were, I think, 27 players in preseason camp. And back at the time, you were only allowed to have 18 players on the roster. And
Wow.
I'm myself, the jump from college to professional, even in the United States, was something to be awed in awe of. And as the weeks pass in preseason and I see guys that play my positions cleaning out their lockers and heading out, I start thinking, well, maybe this is meant to be for me. Well, it turns out I was making league minimum, which was 25,000 US before the taxes. And I just didn't take up much room on the salary cap and roster. So they kind of was a victim of circumstance, but it was in a good way. Um, didn't played one game my rookie year. It was the second game of the season. They tried to bring in somebody else to play because I wasn't ready yet, but he couldn't get clearance. Um, didn't see the field the rest of the year. In 2001, we won MLS Cup, which was cool. I didn't contribute too much to it, but then in 2002 was the World Cup, and I believe it was Korea. Was it Korea, Japan in 2002? And Jeff Agus, who's captain of the U.S. national team, longtime captain of DC United here in the U.S., he was our captain, and he left to go. So when he left, I got to play center back, and he ended up tearing his Achilles while he was at the World Cup. So I got that whole second season. I did well enough that when he came back, they put him at left back and left me at center
That's
back, and
good.
that's the way it kind of came on. But then, as the years pass, you start seeing these kids that are coming in a little bit better, a little bit fitter, and that's when I really introduced myself to what it meant to become a professional. It's not just 10 months of the season, it's also the 2 months that you're not. It's all about the work that you put in when no one's watching that dictates how far you actually go. So I learned a lot those first 4 or 5 years, which really helped me out a lot, and I'm just grateful. I'm really grateful. I was in the right place at the right time with the right coaches and the right teams, and unfortunately for some of the right injuries, and I was able to take advantage of it.
But you managed to do everything in a decade. That's the thing that I think our listeners will find extraordinary. You won everything in US soccer. You played for your country. You scored for your country. You did every single thing. You ticked every box in the shortest possible time, which is quite extraordinary.
It is, and I will say this again. I've got to give a lot of credit to our coaching staff at the time who picked a bunch of players who I would say would knock your teeth down your throat and score some goals while we're doing it. And we policed our own locker room. It was one of those things where if you got a line, you didn't have to worry about listening to coach. You had to worry about some of the other guys on the team coming after you. And our attitude was, at the same time, our owners own the LA Galaxy, where David Beckham ended up, and everybody around the world knows who the Galaxy are. They also owned our team. So we kind of felt like we were the redheaded stepchild. We didn't have the identity that the LA Galaxy did, and we wanted to show them. So we always had a chip on our shoulder. And we were really fortunate that when we did relocate to Houston from San Jose, California, that we got to take all of our players with us and our coaching staff. So it was really the same team.
Was
And
it?
we
How many?
certainly set a precedent.
How
I'd
many?
put that 2005 team up against any team in the history of Major League Soccer. I mean, I think we didn't lose a game at home that year. we lost because Landon Donovan did Landon Donovan stuff in the playoffs. We should have won that year as well, but um, it was a very well run machine. Let's just say that, and it was always on full blast, and our coaches knew what they were doing back at the time when you had to be a bit savvy in building your roster.
The whole changing the league thing, I think that's what a lot of our listeners are going to find interesting. The location. We have very, very few examples of that in British history. Wimbledon and Milton Keynes, the most recent one, Man United when they got taken over by the Glazers, an offshoot team, FC United, but still in the greater area of Manchester, but moving hundreds of miles. Like, what was that like for you, and for the team? Because it didn't seem to disrupt the momentum because you'd still.
Well, for most of the guys that had grown up, West Coast, it was a bit of a culture shock. I grew up in North Carolina, which is very similar to the Southeast, Texas being mostly part of that. But I give a lot of credit to the ownership group. They took care of everything. The beginning of the off season, they flew all the players and their wives and their families down to Texas to do some recon, find out about the city, where they would want to live, that kind of stuff. They covered every single penny and every single expense of the move to make it as comfortable as possible for us, and just to get us back when the new season started. And the city was super excited. The fans, we fortunately for us, we came in winning, and everybody loves a winner, right? So we had a good run of form where we're filling up a beat up college football stadium of 30,000 most games, but there's stains from cat urine on the ceilings and chaw spit because we shared it with the football team during the locker rooms. They're spitting their tobacco all over the wall, and it was an interesting time. But looking at how far the league's come now, it's definitely worth putting in my time to see what these guys got now.
Were there opportunities to leave the MLS for you?
There was one which I didn't really entertain too much. Rosenborg, BK, who was obviously known for quite a few American kids, not higher status American kids, but that Scandinavia link has always been there for those lower division American players. But I really loved it here. I love my coach. I love my teammates. It afforded me such an opportunity to travel. I mean, once they started the CONCACAF Champions League, which everyone's familiar with, the European Champions League, ours goes from Canada all the way down to Panama and all the islands.
Wow.
So there's not a country in Central America I haven't been in, and I got some stories there that I don't think we can tell on here. But if we ever get a grab a beer and visit, then I can share some of those stories with you. But been to Spain, England, France, Germany, Holland, like I said, everywhere in Central America. Um, I've been very fortunate. I've been very fortunate. That's not something that's lost on me. I'm very glad I was brought up the way I was, because humility and just taking a step back and looking at what you've got, no matter how little or how much it is often a difficult thing. And especially for professional athletes these days with social media and the way it is, that you'd think they're gods. They think they're gods. If they were made them chocolate, they'd eat themselves. But I was fortunate enough to get out before that whole trend started. So I'm very grateful for the opportunities that the game gave me. And, victim of circumstance at time, I had my luck. I had my hard work. I created a little bit of everything to both.
And how did the national team call up come about? And how did it go?
So for years, I had been, so U.S. Soccer did a January camp every year that was low, kind of fringe players for the national team pool, mostly American players. And that would usually last anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks. And I was always a part of that with Bruce Arena, with Bob Bradley. I got to know those guys really well. I have so much respect for them once you spend time around them, man. Um, so there was another one of those camps with Bob Bradley, and he came the first day. He said, "Look, we want to give everybody an opportunity to earn a spot to play here in these games at the end. One was against Sweden, and then one was against Mexico in Phoenix, Arizona. And so we go through the 3.5 weeks of training leading up to the Sweden game, and find out I'm starting the Sweden game. I'm like, this is amazing. This is awesome. This is just, I mean, the opportunity to represent your country is just something that I think can be taken for granted until you actually do it and you realize the magnitude of the situation. And played well, scored a goal. I just closed my eyes and swung and hit the post somewhere on the other side. It just should have gone in, but it did, and that was fun. And then because of my performance in that game, I got to go to Phoenix with the team. But that's when Bob brought in all of the main guys, the guys that you would see if World Cup qualifying started that day. And I got to sit on the bench. I didn't get to dress. The game ended up 3-3. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever been a part of, and I didn't even dress. I mean, you couldn't even hear the sideline. It was amazing, but just hearing the crowd in LA, sing the national anthem and chant USA, and you know what you're representing. Because the one thing that I always try to remember is that when I look in the supporter section of every game, those people spend their own hard-earned money, and their week is going to go how I dictate it right now. So I need to make sure that they go home happy and they spend their week happy. And that just gets magnified again when you're playing for your country. Okay, now there's more eyes on it. There's more people that care. This is going to be fun. And again, I think it was just, I just persevered. I just kept going. I was so close for so long, but I will say, and Bob Bradley and Bruce Arena both told me this, and I had something I can't get away from, is that I had a temper.
Oh,
I
really?
had a temper, and both of them told me, I can't trust you if we go to Panama on a World Cup qualifier and you get sent off. Like, okay, fair enough, fair enough. It took about 6 years after I retired for someone to take the lead in yellow cards received for the Dynamos. So I did pretty well there as well. I wouldn't survive today. Let's just put it that way.
You,
I would.
you you played with your heart on your sleeve. You put your body on the line.
I did, and I'm paying for it now. His ankles, everything, shoulders, all of it. Paying for it now, but it was like I said, it was worth it. I'm really grateful, and the opportunities to talk about it as it gets farther away or fewer and farther between. So I really appreciate getting calls like this to reminisce a little bit.
I think that's one thing that I've learned doing season one and now doing season two with more international non-UK players like yourselves is that the world doesn't forget. They don't forget people who've played for their country, even if they've only played once. It's remarkable that fans and listeners and audiences will never forget. And it's almost like once you reach that point, you've solidified yourself into history, even if it's only for one game or half a game or 30 minutes. You have made been a little part of sporting history.
Yeah, yeah, it's when you put it that way, it's just there's a little bit more perspective there, and I appreciate that. I'll say this: I make it very difficult to know about my history. If you first meet me, you'd think there's a much higher chance that I'm a garbage man than I am a former professional soccer player that's got a decent trophy room for an American. But it's something that I won't forget, and I've saved every little thing that I've got, from game day credentials to shoes to jerseys to everything for my kids. So hopefully one day that they can look back and be like, whoa, because they just grew up, that was normal for them. Going to games on Saturday, having run in the stadium, everybody knowing who they were, going and getting popcorn and not having to pay for it. They won't. I don't know that they'll understand the magnitude of it for quite some time, but hopefully at some point they do.
Do you do you have any anger or any kind of frustrations about not playing more for the US, or because you seem very appreciative of just having got to play and score once, which is not the case in these interviews. I find some players I speak to are feel very aggrieved and feel that they missed out. Um,
Oh, but I know it was my own fault. it was my own fault because I couldn't keep my emotions in check. If I could have kept my emotion check, I'm certain, based on my conversations with former coaches, that I would have played more. But accountability is one thing in this world that's fleeting, and I'm not going to run from that. It was my own fault that I didn't play more, but just to be able to say I did it once is one more than 99.9999% of the population. So,
Before we finish up, your journey and all the cups and all the titles and everything that you did, what was it like for your parents? Because they wouldn't have grown up expecting their child to become a professional athlete, to win titles, to play for their country. No one expects their child to do that. So what was it like for them over the course of your career?
well, my parents are very simple, very Southern country folks. They were right in the middle. They were always there, but they didn't have a lot to say. They weren't that bragger that runs around to all their neighbors, look at what my son did, look at this, that, and the other. They're similar to me. You wouldn't know unless you actually asked and got really specific about it. I think they're more um, happy about the human being that they raised. And I have a brother who's just like me. He played semi-pro soccer here in the U.S. And I think that they'd just be more happy to hear that, they've got a good kid who's thoughtful, who does things for other people, who's not conceited. You use plenty of words I could use there, like most professional athletes. So, but they were always in the middle, and they were always very supportive, and I will always be grateful to them.
And before we wrap up, what message would you have to someone who wants to try and have the career you've had, which is to win titles, win cups, win everything in American soccer, and to get the chance to play and score for your country? What message do you have to someone who's trying to start out on the journey that you have completed and completed successfully?
Well, there's two things I'll say. When you get to a certain point, pretty much everybody's got the same amount of skill, the same amount of talent, the same amount of strength, the same amount of speed. What are you going to give up to separate yourself from those people? What are you willing to give up? Are you willing to give up a few Friday nights, Saturday nights out with the friends? Are you willing to give up Xbox till 2 in the morning? And how much work are you going to put in when nobody else's work, when nobody's watching? All right, that's when you make the difference. When no one's watching, how hard will you work? Because if you can work harder during that moment than those other guys, you're going to go farther. It's all about, again, I said accountability. It's just perseverance and wanting to do what the next guy doesn't.
And after you retired, you got to still stay part of the game. That must have been quite a relief in some ways, but also quite rewarding.
Well, if I'd have known what I was getting myself into, I don't know. So I took right off the bat 4 jobs with the Dynamo. I was the assistant director with their youth academy. I was club ambassador. So I would go out and do public speaking events. If they didn't have a player to do an appearance that they had promised the sponsor, they would send me. I was doing the television analyst position for 11 years for the Dynamo. That was a lot of fun. And then just kind of the general, whatever needed to be done, I would get it done. And I was burning the candles at both ends, man, from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 7 nights a week, going to games. And at that point, we were traveling with the television stuff. So if I wasn't traveling on the weekend, I was working here doing the youth academy stuff. We almost won a national championship with the youth academy, too. That would have been nice. I got to spend some time as the Houston Dash assistant coach, where we made some really, really big headway with that. That was maybe one of the least professional places I've ever been. And then a gentleman and myself named James Clarkson, who was the director of the U.S. of director of coaching in Texas, in South Texas, and then he became the director of the Houston Dynamo Academy. And he's still doing some things local up here now. But we went in and we got all kinds of, we got access to a gym, we got access to a nutritionist, to a chef, to a locker room, to things that you think should be pretty standard that weren't, to the point where Rachel Daly, the Golden Boot winner for the Women's Premier League, called this the most professional environment that she's ever been in. So we did a good job there, and I've been really fortunate that the club has, if I need anything, they'll reach out, and every once in a while I'll get tickets, and people be like, "Whoa, you played for the Dynamo? Holy moly, I want to go to a game." I was like, "You want tickets? You can get tickets? No way!" I just have to,
Well,
yeah,
Eddie Robertson, it's been an absolute privilege to have you on Dr. James's One Cup Wonders. It really has, I'm really glad as someone who worked in North Carolina and has been to the US and has seen US soccer at all levels. It is an absolute privilege to have you on this show and on this series. One last thing, 2026, how far will the USA go?
I wish I could see the group draw first, but I think we'll make it to the knockout round. And I just think that mentality that Mauricio Pochettino has talked about still has to be developed in a lot of young players, because it is still so new in the United States that our players take it a little bit more for granted still. I think that's changed tremendously in the last 10 years, with the players getting the accountability and responsibility that comes with playing in Europe and playing in Champions League every year, and learning what it means to win and how to win, even if it's not pretty. So I'm going to go with the knockout stage. They may win one game, but we're not going to quite win it yet, although Mauricio Pochettino wants to. So